In 1899, inventor Nikola Tesla was alone in a laboratory in Colorado Springs, listening to the sky. He had built one of the most sensitive radio receivers on Earth, and one night he heard something strange. A repeating signal, not random, not natural, something structured, something deliberate. Tesla wondered if the signal might be coming from another world. Decades later, radio operators began detecting mysterious echoes in their transmissions. Then, during the early days of the Cold War, reports surfaced of something even stranger. An object in orbit around Earth. An object no one had launched. Tonight, on the Midnight Drive, we're exploring the legend of the Black Knight satellite. Long before satellites filled the night sky, long before GPS, long before weather monitoring, before humanity had even placed a single object into orbit, there were already whispers that something might be up there. The story that would eventually become known as the Black Knight satellite doesn't begin in space. It begins with sound. More specifically, radio. At the end of the 19th century, radio technology was still in its infancy. Scientists and inventors were just beginning to understand that invisible waves could travel enormous distances through the atmosphere. One of the most brilliant minds working on this problem was Nikola Tesla. In 1899, Tesla set up an experimental laboratory in Colorado Springs. His goal was ambitious. He wanted to study the electrical properties of the atmosphere and develop wireless communication systems that could transmit signals across the planet. To do this, Tesla built massive coils and receivers designed to detect extremely faint radio signals. Late one night, while monitoring his equipment, Tesla noticed something unusual. His receiver was picking up pulses. Short bursts of radio energy. And the pattern did not appear random. Tesla later wrote that the signals seemed organized, almost as if they were some kind of transmission. At the time, scientists were still trying to understand natural radio phenomena. Lightning storms, solar activities, and cosmic radiation could all produce strange signals. But Tesla entertained a far more dramatic possibility. He speculated that the signals might be coming from an intelligent source beyond the Earth. Perhaps from Mars. Or perhaps another planet entirely. Today, most historians believe Tesla was likely detecting natural radio noise or atmospheric interference. But the idea that he might have heard something else, something artificial, would become an important piece of a mystery that would unfold decades later. Fast forward to the 1920s. Radio technology had advanced rapidly, and operators around the world were now transmitting signals across continents. And that's when something strange began happening. Sometimes, when a radio operator transmitted a signal, the signal would return. Echoes in radio communication were not unheard of. Signals could bounce off the ionosphere and reflect back to Earth. But these echoes were different. Instead of returning almost instantly, these signals sometimes came back several seconds later. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, even 15 seconds in some cases. Scientists began calling them long delay echoes, and no one could fully explain them. One theory suggested the signals might be traveling much farther than expected, bouncing off distant layers of the atmosphere. Another idea proposed that the signals might be reflecting off clouds of charged particles far out in space. But some researchers proposed a stranger possibility. What if the signals were bouncing off an object, something orbiting the Earth? At the time, that idea sounded completely impossible. No human had launched anything into orbit. Rockets capable of reaching space had not yet been developed. And yet, the echoes continued to appear, puzzling radio researchers for decades. For most scientists, the mystery eventually faded into the background of radio research, but later storytellers would return to those strange echoes and wonder, what if they had been reflections of something already in orbit? The next piece of the story appears in the early 1950s. This was the beginning of the Cold War, when both the United States and the Soviet Union were racing to develop advanced rocket technology. In 1954, several newspapers reported an unusual claim. According to some sources, the U.S. Air Force had detected unidentified objects orbiting the Earth. That report was strange for a very simple reason. In 1954, no satellites existed. The first artificial satellite, Sputnik, would not be launched by the Soviet Union until 1957. Yet reports circulated suggesting that radar systems had detected objects already circling the planet. Now, most historians today believe these reports were likely misunderstandings or misidentified natural phenomena. But the story lingered. And in the decades that followed, people began weaving together several unrelated mysteries. Tesla's strange radio signals, the long delay echoes, Cold War radar reports, and eventually a new legend began to form. The legend of an unknown satellite orbiting the Earth. A satellite that had been there long before humanity entered the space age. And because of its mysterious nature, it eventually acquired a name, the Black Knight. What do you make of this? What is the Black Knight? Let us know in the comments below. If you'd like to weigh in, or you would like to talk about something else, you might want to talk about the Black Knight, you might want to talk about sleep paralysis, ghosts, poltergeists, any of it. Send us a message or give us a call on our hotline at the Midnight Drive, 402-610-2836. In our next segment, we're going to dive a little bit deeper to the mystery of the Black Knight. And we're back on the Midnight Drive tonight. We're talking about the mystery of the Black Knight satellite. By the 1960s, the idea of the Black Knight satellite had taken on a life of its own. Space exploration was accelerating rapidly. Rockets were launching satellites into orbit. Astronauts were traveling beyond the atmosphere for the very first time in history. And with every new mission, people began looking more carefully at what might already be up there. One detail that fascinated believers in the Black Knight legend involves something called a polar orbit. Most early satellites traveled along paths roughly aligned with Earth's rotation. But a polar orbit is different. It carries a satellite over the North and South poles, allowing it to eventually pass over every part of the planet. Achieving that orbit requires specific launch conditions, and early rocket technology struggled to place objects there. So when rumors surfaced about unidentified objects in polar orbit, the story grew even stranger. Could something already be circling Earth in an orbit that humans had not yet mastered? For some, the answer seemed obvious. The object must have been there long before humanity developed spaceflight. And from there, the speculation grew increasingly dramatic. Some claimed the satellite might be thousands of years old. Others suggested it could be monitoring Earth. A silent observer drifting above the planet, watching, waiting. But just like many legends, the story reached its most famous moment decades later. In 1998, during a mission of the space shuttle Endeavour, astronauts conducted a spacewalk to assemble part of the International Space Station. During the mission, a piece of thermal insulation accidentally got knocked loose from the shuttle. The object drifted away slowly, tumbling through space. Astronauts photographed the object as it floated above the Earth. The photographs are real. They show a dark, oddly shaped object against the bright blue curve of the planet. Angular, jagged, almost even mechanical in appearance. When the images were later released, they quickly spread across the internet. And for many people, the photos seemed to show something extraordinary. A mysterious black object in orbit. A satellite that looked nothing like the technology humans normally launch into space. Supporters of the Black Knight theory pointed to the photos as proof that the mysterious satellite truly existed. But NASA offered a far more simple explanation. According to mission records, the object was nothing more than a lost thermal blanket from the shuttle. Simply a piece of protective insulation designed to shield equipment from extreme temperature changes. When it drifted away during that spacewalk, it twisted and folded into unusual shapes as it floated into microgravity. The dramatic lighting of the Earth below made the object appear darker and more solid than it actually was. From NASA's perspective, there was no mystery at all. The photographs showed debris. Nothing more. And for many scientists, that explanation makes perfect sense. After all, space is filled with loose objects, fragments, and debris from decades of missions. A drifting thermal blanket would not be unusual at all. But here's where the story becomes fascinating again. Because even when an explanation exists, the human imagination doesn't always let the mystery go. The photographs of the object are undeniably striking. When viewed without context, they look eerie, almost alien. And once the images became associated with the older legends of Tesla's signals and Cold War satellite reports, the Black Knight story grew even larger. Soon, people began proposing even more elaborate ideas. Some even claimed the satellite might be 13,000 years old. Others suggested it could be transmitting signals to distant star systems. One version of the legend even suggested that the satellite might be monitoring humanity, silently observing the development of civilization. Of course, none of these claims have credible scientific evidence behind them. They belong more to the realm of science fiction than astronomy. But that doesn't mean that the story itself isn't fascinating. Because the Black Knight legend reveals something important about the way mysteries evolve. Over time, separate events can become connected. Tesla's radio signals, unexplained radio echoes, Cold War radar reports, a drifting object photographed during a shuttle mission. Each event has its own explanation. But when they're woven together, they create a narrative that feels so much larger. A story about something ancient circling our planet. Something watching from the darkness above the Earth. And perhaps that's why the legend of the Black Knight satellite continues to capture people's imagination. Not because it's been proven, and not because scientists are hiding any kind of truth, but because the universe is vast and humanity has only just began to explore it. For most of human history, the sky above us was unreachable. Now, we have satellites, space stations, telescopes, and robotic probes traveling to distant planets. And yet, there are still moments when we look up at the night sky and feel the same ancient curiosity, wondering what might be out there, or what might already be closer than we think. And if somewhere above the Earth, drifting silently through the darkness, there really was something ancient, something built by an intelligence older than our own, we might not recognize it right away. We might not understand what we're looking at. We might simply photograph it, label it debris, and move on. But the possibility would still be there, quietly orbiting above us, waiting